Alright, buckle up, buttercups. We're diving headfirst into 8 maritime laws so utterly delightful you'd rather swim with sharks than deal with them. Starting with number 8, the invitation you can't refuse. Imagine, if you will, being in a quaint 18th century dive bar in Portsmouth, southern England. You've just clocked out from a grueling day. Maybe you're a blacksmith, a tailor, or perhaps even a farmer hawking turnips. You're lovingly cradling your lukewarm ale when suddenly the door splinters open and a gaggle of heavily armed, grim-faced gentlemen burst in. These fine chaps are the Royal Navy's press gang, and they're not here for a pint. Oh no, they're here to recruit you in the most aggressively negative sense of the word. This charming little law, known as impressment, allowed the Navy to literally kidnap any able-bodied British man and force him into service on a warship. Why the kidnapping? Simple, because absolutely no one in their right mind volunteered for this gig. Life on a naval ship was a floating inferno. Food consisted of biscuits that could double as doorstops and salted beef hard enough to chip your teeth. Disease murdered more sailors than enemy cannon fire, and discipline was, shall we say, robust. Warships constantly needed fresh meat to replace the crew members dropping like flies. These press gangs would comb every nook and cranny, from pubs to alleyways. They didn't care if you had a wife and kids waiting at home, or if you even knew how to swim. As long as you had 2 arms, 2 legs, and were still technically breathing, you were qualified. They'd either bludgeon you over the head with a cudgel, or more subtly, trick you into accepting the king's shilling. Once you'd touched that coin, even if you were blackmailed, you were legally considered enlisted. When you finally woke up, you'd be miles out at sea, no turning back. Your ship was your personal floating prison, and any attempt to escape meant a one-way trip to the gallows for desertion. It was a life sentence of hard labor, no trial necessary. A real bargain. Number 5. The Cat O' Tails. On a cramped wooden ship packed with hundreds of desperate, press-ganged men miles from land for months on end, how exactly did they maintain order? With absolute terror, of course, and their most effective tool for instilling said terror was the Cat O' Tails. No, not an actual feline, much to the disappointment of any cat lovers aboard. This was a short leather whip with a handle whose tail split into 9 braided cords. At the end of each cord, they'd often tie knots, or for an extra sprinkle of sadism, embed lead balls or sharp bits of bone. This was the go-to punishment for practically everything. Dozing off on watch? Cat. Slacking on duty? Cat. Stealing a ration of rum? Definitely cat. Even just giving a bit of tood? Yup, you guessed it, cat. The punishment was a public spectacle. The entire crew was forced to gather on deck to witness the culprit being stripped to the waist, hands and feet bound tightly to a wooden grating or the mast. The executioner, usually the bosun's mate, think of him as the ship's most enthusiastic bouncer, would dramatically read out the charges. Then the lashing began. Just one lash and those 9 claws would rip through flesh, leaving parallel streaks of blood. The second lash would crisscross the first, transforming the back into a gruesome shredded road map. A mere 12 lashes was considered light, 50 was common, and 100 was practically a death sentence. But the most exquisitely cruel part was the post-whip medical care. They'd take a bucket of seawater and slosh it directly onto the gaping wounds. They called it antiseptic, or pickling. In reality, it was a legally sanctioned form of torture, ensuring the pain would torment the victim for weeks, a living reminder for anyone else contemplating insubordination. Number 6. Keel hauling. If the Cat O' Tails was brutal, then keel hauling was a death sentence executed with maximum barbarity. Particularly popular in the Dutch Navy, this lovely little practice was reserved for the most heinous crimes at sea: mutiny, killing an officer, or serious cowardice in battle. It was designed not just to kill the culprit, but to utterly obliterate their body as the ultimate warning. The process was truly charming. The victim would be tied to a thick rope, which was then threaded beneath the ship, either running from one side to the other for a horizontal drag, or for extra cruelty, from bow to stern for a longitudinal journey. They'd then toss the poor soul into the sea on one side. On command, the entire crew on the opposite side would grab the rope and yank with all their might. The victim would be dragged underwater, scraped along the entire bottom of the ship. The delightful catch was the ship's hull wasn't smooth. It was a rough and tumble forest of barnacles, oysters, and countless other razor-sharp shelled sea creatures. As the victim was dragged across, these shells acted like a giant cheese grater, stripping away skin, muscle, often right down to the bone. If you are lucky enough to be pulled quickly, you might surface on the other side flayed, broken bones, and waterlogged. More often, you drown before reaching the other side or smash your head on the keel, cracking your skull. Even if you miraculously survived, the inevitable infections from the filthy seawater and barnacles would finish you off a few days later, a true testament to maritime ingenuity. Number 5. Marooning. Many folks think the most terrifying pirate punishment was walking the plank, blindfolded, bound, and sent straight into the ocean for the sharks. Sounds dramatic, right? But in reality, many pirate captains considered that too quick, too humane. They had a psychologically far more brutal penalty, a death sentence stretched out over weeks, even months, marooning. This law was particularly favored in pirate codes for crimes like stealing from shipmates, cowardice, or serious troublemaking. They wouldn't kill you outright. Instead, they'd row you to a desolate island, often just a bare sandspit in the middle of nowhere, devoid of trees or fresh water. They'd generously leave you a few items: a cutlass, a small flask of water, and most terrifyingly, a pistol with exactly one bullet. The cruelty was in this very kindness. The gun wasn't for hunting. There was nothing to hunt on that sandbar. It was an invitation. You had two choices: endure the agonizing thirst, the skin-scorching sun, the maddening loneliness, and a phantom hope of a ship passing by, or you could end it all yourself, right then and there. That single bullet was the release they offered. Most marooned souls died of dehydration or suicide. It was legal murder according to pirate law. We didn't kill them, we just left them there. A truly savage psychological game where the sentence was carried out by the victim themselves. Number 4. The brutal health insurance plan. We often think of pirates as a chaotic, anarchic bunch, only good for pillaging and rum swilling. That's half true, but for a ship full of such scoundrels to function, they needed laws even stricter than the Royal Navy's. Welcome to the Pirate Code. Before each voyage, the captain would draw up a code of conduct, and every crew member was required to sign it, or make their mark if illiterate, to pledge their adherence. These codes governed everything from treasure division, often surprisingly fair, to forbidding gambling. But the most chilling part was the injury compensation section. Sounds civilized, doesn't it? Like a primitive form of health insurance. In reality, it was horrifying. The code clearly specified the value of each body part. For example, according to Captain Bartholomew Roberts' code, losing a right arm earned you 600 pieces of 8, a leg 500, an eye 100. Sounds like a decent payout until you consider how you lost them. No anesthesia. The ship's surgeon was usually the cook, who simply happened to be the best with a saw. He'd hack off your gangrenous leg while 4 other guys held you down. Then they'd use red-hot tar directly on the open wound to cauterize it. If you survived the shock and infection, you'd get your money. But then what? You're maimed. You're no longer useful on a ship. You'd be discharged at the nearest port, usually a cesspool of disease and crime. This insurance was effectively a one-time, brutally delivered severance package that said, "Thanks for the limb, now get lost." Number 3. No prey, no pay. Sounds fair, right? No hunting, no money. No prey, no pay was the core motto of pirate life, and also one of its most brutal laws. For a naval sailor, whether they won or lost, they still received a meager salary, but with pirates, you were a shareholder. You didn't get a wage, you got a cut of whatever was plundered. If you attacked a Spanish treasure galleon laden with gold, you were rich, but if you floated for 6 months without spotting a single ship, you got absolutely nothing. This transformed the pirate ship into a pressure cooker of desperation. food dwindled, fresh water started to stink, disease spread, and everyone was broke. This law directly incentivized extreme cruelty and recklessness. It forced the captain to attack anything that moved, regardless of the risk. Attacking small ships wasn't worth it. They had to aim for large, heavily armed vessels because that's where the big bounty was. This meant every engagement was all or nothing. You weren't fighting to live, you were fighting for your paycheck. Furthermore, it bred terrible suspicion. If a captain proved too cautious, unwilling to attack, the crew had the right, and often did, to vote him out on the spot and elect a more daring maniac. They'd rather die in a bloody battle than starve slowly. No prey, no pay turned pirates from mere thieves into desperate, cornered predators, willing to do anything because the only other option was starvation. Number 2. Courts at sea. What happens when you break the law miles away from any courtroom or judge? You get tried, all right, but this was no fair trial. In the Navy, the captain was judge, jury, and executioner. His power was absolute. He could order you hanged on the spot just for looking rebellious, and no one could argue. This trial was often just a flimsy excuse to legitimize punishment. The infamous Captain William Bligh of the HMS Bounty was notorious for abusing this power, constantly lashing sailors for the most minor infractions, leading to his historic mutiny. But on the pirate side, things were even stranger. They hated dictators, so they had a democratic trial. Sounds good, right? Wrong. When a pirate was accused of violating the code, say hiding plunder, the entire crew would gather. No lawyers, just an accusation and a defense. Then the entire crew would vote. This was essentially a mob trial. The truth mattered less than who was more popular. If you were disliked or happened to offend that influential cook, you were almost certainly found guilty, regardless of the evidence. And the punishments? Usually hanging, marooning, or the dreaded cat of nine tails. It was democratic, but the most terrifying kind of democracy, that of a ravenous, drunken, desperate mob. Number 1. The custom of the sea. This wasn't a written law in any code, not by the Navy nor by pirates. This was an unwritten rule, a terrible protocol whispered only in the direst of circumstances, the custom of the sea. This law only applied when all other human rules had become meaningless. It was when your ship had sunk, you were adrift in a lifeboat on the endless ocean, and the last rations ran out days ago. No fresh water, no fish biting, starvation gnawed at you, turning your shipmates into blurry, insane shadows. This is when the custom of the sea came into play. It was a savage agreement for a savage act. Cannibalism for survival. But to avoid a chaotic, murderous free-for-all, a fair procedure was established. They would draw lots. They might use short and long straws, marked coins, or anything similar. Everyone, even the captain, had to participate. The person who drew the shortest straw would be the sacrifice. They wouldn't just be killed, they would be killed to feed the others. The person who carried out the act was also decided by lot. This was the pinnacle of brutality, where civilization was completely stripped away, leaving only raw survival instinct. The most famous case was the Mignonette in 1884, when the captain and crew killed and ate the cabin boy, Richard Parker, after drawing lots. They survived, were rescued, and then tried for murder, forcing the world to confront the question of which laws truly apply when death is certain. Watch this video and suddenly feel a lot better about life, huh? At least your boss isn't using a whip for payroll or making you eat moldy biscuits. If you're celebrating living in the 21st century, hit that like button and drop a comment. And don't forget to subscribe because next time I'll tell you about even crazier stuff. Cheers, mateys!